Okay, now we're going to look at the second aspect of the hiring process, which is information gathering. And information gathering is another potential trouble area for employers, because during this process, information is going to be gathered that is designed to screen out applicants, whether that is through the use of a common job application or an interview or a preliminary review of those applications that have been made. Once we have our applicant pool in place, when we go through this process of selecting job candidates, we are going to be screening out applicants. And so therefore, it's very important for you as employers to be careful about the devices you use to screen those applicants. The best advice I can give you, and the advice I used to give to employers all the time, is to make sure that your questions are business related and used for a non-discriminatory purpose, meaning a purpose that is not discriminatory in nature. Make sure that your questions are based on business matters and not based on any other factor. Now, as we'll see, there are only a few questions that are strictly prohibited. Most questions in an interview or on an application are permissible, but there are, however, a lot of danger areas when it comes to questions. So some questions are not outright prohibited, but are dangerous. The questions that are prohibited primarily have to do with medical concerns, disability-related questions, and I'll have a separate presentation on disability questions. Workers' comp is another area where you simply can't ask about. You can ask things like, what ethnicity are you? What is your racial background? You can ask those questions, but they're bad questions. Why? Because it implies that you are using a illegal screening device. There was a case out of Chicago a couple years ago in which an employer was interviewing a biracial person and was interested in her ethnicity, and so he asked, what race are you? Well, she didn't get the job, and he said, well, not getting the job had nothing to do with that question that I wasn't asking. I was just curious. Well, if it had nothing to do with the job, why did you ask the question? So if you go look online and you can look for illegal discriminations, illegal questions to ask, what you'll find out is there's a lot of websites that tell you illegal questions. But most of those are not illegal, but they are a very bad idea. They're dangerous to ask. In fact, even the use of a common employment application can result in potential liability. And again, I'll have a separate presentation on applications. Not to say that applications are bad per se, but be very careful about how they are being used. An employer may also be liable for negligent hiring. And this is a somewhat new tort. This tort really arose in the 1980s, and it was based on that idea of respondeat superior. You know, we hold employers liable, but only when those employees are acting in the course and scope of their employment. There was no direct means of suing an employer, but sometimes it sure looked like the employer could have done more in selecting their candidate, in selecting their employee. The original case, actually, again from the 1980s, involved a apartment complex, and the apartment complex hired a handyman and did a very minimal check about the qualifications of the handyman. And they hired him, and then of course, what did they do? They give him a master key to all the apartments at the apartment complex. Young woman working at the apartment complex, or living at the apartment complex, the handyman falls in love with her, and he lets himself into her house one day and waits for her to get home from work, and eventually rapes and kills her. And the family of the young woman sue the apartment complex, and they say, look, you should have done a better job in hiring. And they said, well, the apartment complex, we didn't kill her, and in fact, we didn't hire this person to kill her, and when he killed her, he wasn't doing the business of the apartment complex, so no respondeat superior, no vicarious liability. But what the court said is, look, you, the employer, had direct liability. You owed your duty to your tenants to be careful about who you hired for these positions. So that's the basis of negligent hiring, and that's why we try to verify the qualifications of all of our applicants. We try to ensure there's no undiscovered information. We want to do what is reasonable. The level of reasonableness is going to depend in large part on the type of position. If we are going to do something like hiring a maintenance man and give him a key to all the apartments, well, then we need to make sure that this maintenance man is not going to do anything bad or wrong with that key. So you, as an employer, have a responsibility to try and adequately discover any information that's relevant to this particular candidate. You have to exercise reasonable care in hiring applicants who pose a risk to others. Now, how much care do you owe? How much do you have to do? Well, in large part, it depends on how much of a risk do they pose. Are they working in a warehouse by themselves? Well, you probably don't need to worry too much. Are they going to be in contact with a lot of coworkers? Well, maybe a little more concerned. Are they going to be in contact with the general public? Well, yeah, you need to be careful. If that employee poses any sort of risk to others, that implies that there's a duty of care on the part of the employer to make sure that employee doesn't harm others. In fact, there can also be potential liability providing references. In recent years, many employers have grown scared of responding to reference requests. Why? Because the things that you say in your reference are subject to common law claims of defamation. If you give someone a negative reference and the prospective employer declines to hire that person based on the reference, that employee may sue you for the negative reference. They can sue you for defamation. Employers can be liable for defaming their former employees. When you say, well, how's that possible if I told the truth? Well, the truth is a defense to a defamation claim. True. That's true. However, you must be able to verify the truth. So if someone calls you and says, well, look, I'm looking to hire Maria for this position, what do you think? And you say, well, yeah, she worked here, but she was a terrible employee. She was very lazy and did not live up to our expectations. You know, in your head, those are all true. But how would you establish the veracity of those? What is a terrible employee? What does lazy mean? If instead you respond with we terminated this employee on such and such a date, the employee had 10 late appearances in the last 3 months, and therefore we terminated the employee. That's a verifiable fact, and that can serve as a defense to a defamation claim. But of course, that's not how people talk, and so that's why employers are worried about providing these references. Employers can be liable for negligent misrepresentation as well. You try and give someone a positive reference, and yet that positive reference is not true. Well, now you're misrepresenting the employee's ability to the future employer, and you owe them a duty of care not to lie to them. Some states have responded to this by providing immunity for reference responses, meaning anything you say in terms of reference can't be used against you in a subsequent defamation case. So some states have responded. If you have ever worked in HR, or you're familiar with that, you know that most employers now will simply give you the person's date of hire, date of termination, and the job title they had. Most employers are not responding to references requests the way they used to. There are special rules regarding questions about disability, and what I want you to do is to review a special presentation I've done on this. This is a very complicated area. The law says you can't ask questions about disability, just straight up. Well, you need to ask those questions at some point. So the type of questions that you can ask and when you can ask them are what's important for you to know, and those are the things that I cover in the presentation. Review that. Let me know if you have any questions, of course.